Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am your host, Chris Dwight, and this is the LinkedIn Live program for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders. And this is a live conversation. It is 12 noon on the Eastern, time zone here in the United States. And it is, as I like to say, the show that is by design, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And I'm joined today by gentlemen whom I've had the privilege of getting to know over the past, year and a half or so. Mike Turner. Mike is the global VP, worldwide VP of solution architecture for a company called Appview X. And we're here to talk about pre-sales process, structure, and automation. But before we get into that, Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. How are you, my friend?
I'm well, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I think I put out a LinkedIn post when you put this out, right? I've finally made it, right? In my eyes. Right? So,
Well, hey, man, if being on a LinkedIn Live means you've made it, then nothing wrong with that. At least it's a notch, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
it's a line on the wall. Mike, in case anybody who may be listening doesn't know you, do you mind just taking a minute and introducing yourself a little bit?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mike Turner. I've been in pre-sales, and I hate to say this, for over 2 decades now, right? You start looking back, and all of a sudden it's like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but yeah, so for 2 decades. And really, I got into this by accident, quite frankly. For those of us, we hear about young people wanting to get into this profession. I think that's how you and I have gotten connected through Pre-Sales Collective and some of these other things.
Yeah.
And I was kind of an unwitting participant, in this same situation. And got into software automation, kind of really programming and developing that, and then had this ability to be in the room and talk to one side of the table, that was the business owner having business problems, swivel in your chair and talk to the other side of the room that we're talking, ones and zeros. And somebody goes, "Oh, you got to do this." I'm like, "What is that?" Right? So.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, you're in the midst of it and building relationships with people, being in front of customers, talking about what their problems are, and you're going, "Wow, I know how to solve those for you." So, I've spent a ton of time, in startups. I've spent, probably almost a decade in large companies as well, companies like Symantec and RSA and Entrust prior to Appview X. But again, had a number of the one thing that's consistent is SEs are needed everywhere, no matter what color, shape, or breed.
More than ever, by the way. And
Yeah,
you mentioned the pre-sales collective. I mean, there's such an uprising of attention and awareness of the profession. Sean Schofield chimes in, the best career that we all stumbled into. Sean, nice to see you. By the way, folks, we don't see who's out there, so by all means, if you care to say hello, as Sean did, if you have any questions for Mike or myself, please feel free to ask. So, Mike, we're gonna talk about process and structure and automation. But before we jump in too deeply into that, you said something a moment ago backstage that resonated with me, because I'm first to admit, in spite of the fact that I wrote a book called The 6 Habits, I'm actually not the biggest process guy in the world. And I think the term you used was, something like, muscle your way through it, or, power your, talk about how you sort of started down the path of, man, we just got to brute force this and figure it out, and then start, thinking about process and structure.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If anybody that knows me is watching right now, I'm kind of like a bull in a china shop with everything I do, and there's generally no varnish on it. And I've gotten better as I've gotten into my 50s, at least, so, but to the brute force piece, right? I think a lot of us, especially, based off Sean's comments, stumbling into something, you have no idea how to do that. So you have to find a way, you have to brute force something, you have to fail, right? And then from those failures, you wind up figuring out what works. And then all of a sudden, especially in this career, you stumble on your first 500K deal, your first $100 million deal. Now all of a sudden your sales rep is declining, 200K deals because you guys are too busy. And that wasn't based on process, right? That was based off of you collaborating, partnering, figuring out something. And then you step back, especially as a leader of any type. You step back, you kind of take a look at an after action type of situation, go, what worked there, right? And now you can put some building blocks together and say, every time we want something to be successful, we need to take these 3 or 4 steps in these time frames, and then you start to get better and better. And now I can put a repeatable process in place that right out of the box works, right? I think we've all been part of some of these processes that you step into and you're like, man, clearly whoever wrote this has never done this, ever, right? So that's really that brute force it until you understand it, and then wrap a process and then define that, redefine and polish that process.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. By the way, just call out to George Carpenter. George, thanks for chiming in. It's good to hear from you. So, Mike, that resonates with me so much. And as I think about my career, many of the jobs that I've taken was sort of let's just figure it out. Like, let's just get in there and figure it out, do whatever we have to do to close some deals or to get things going. But then to your point, once we've had some success, all right, now it's time to take a step back and see what's working, and now how do we scale, and how do we, one of my favorite terms, how do we sort of institutionalize what we're doing, right? So we can add additional people. Drew Merritt chimes in. Drew, good to see you. Thanks for saying hello. So Mike, I'm inspired to suggest that we talk about structure first. When you think about pre-sales structure, what comes to mind, and what is it that you looked at from just a structure perspective?
Yeah, it was interesting. I know that you and Carrie wrote, kind of a buyer's guide, right? And we'll talk about that. I was just reading a post today and was going to write a response to Carrie talking about, what do SEs pre-sales do? And when I think about structure, it's almost guardrails, right? What do the guardrails look like? And I think when we first start, especially as SEs or new to a company or the new half to sales team, right? Either whether we're the new half or the elder half of that team, we have to have guardrails that really look like a 1-lane road opposed to a 6-lane highway, right? So, and some could say that that's process or structure, but really you need those things so you understand how to go straight, right? Now, let me give you an example, the way I think about it, right? Because I think kind of Machiavellian, black and white about things early on as we're developing relationships or process, that we need to have it one of two ways, right? Let's talk about discovery. Carrie was talking about discovery and SEs being in early discovery. There's a difference between discovery and technical qualification that needs to be done by sales folks prior to SEs engaging to make sure they're utilizing our time efficiently, right? So in the beginning, I needed to be a 1-lane highway where we're not participating in these early conversations so we can help the sales folks understand that, right? And then as you build relationships and rapport with your sales peers, with your teams, now you can open the aperture up a little bit, right? Now we understand what the process looks like, or the really the guidance around what we're looking for. What does a good deal look like in this particular technology lane? And now we can open it up a little bit and let everybody be a little bit more creative, right? So it's almost one scientific, the other one, I let you be a little creative as we kind of take that structure and then open that structure up as a result of partnering and collaboration and understanding.
I love that, and I'm going to double click on a few of the things that you said. What I heard you say is, and these are my words, but to a certain degree, structure is like defining rules of engagement, right? And the example you gave is there's such a thing as too early or being invited in too early for a meeting or for a conversation with a customer, right? So we need to sort of define, well, what needs to be in place in order for that SE to be engaged. And once the relationship begins to build, right, then we can sort of, maybe let down the or sort of widen the guardrails a little bit and be a little bit more creative. But particularly as we're building the relationships, we need to put some structure in place so expectations are clear and things aren't chaotic. I mean, those were all my words, but in essence, is that what you're saying here?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think Brian Lewis, right, friends of both of ours, right, kind of says it perfectly, right? We have to have structure in place so we can align to a process at some point, but not so much structure that it impedes business, right? And again,
Yeah.
that's why these things have to happen early on.
Yeah.
Whether it's an SE coming into a new company or an AE coming into a new pair or whatever those things are, we really need to make sure that we understand to use a football term, the X's and the O's, so that at some point, once we're on the same page, we can open up the playbook and we can go to an audible, right? To use continue the football analogy.
I love that. Well, and Brian, by the way, is on. I see a comment from him. I love Brian's term, the Goldilocks principle, right?
Yeah.
Too much process and too much rigor will stymie progress, will stymie creativity, but no process and no structure creates, mayhem. So we sort of need to right size our process and structure. But by the way, Mike, just a shout out to Tamara Birch Williams. Glad you could join us live, Tamara. I hope I'm saying that correctly. We mentioned Brian, our good friend Brian Lewis runs home run pre-sales. And I don't know who this is. SE team tenure and seniority and AESE change the rules of engagement. So very, very, very well said. I want to build on this because I think there's an important point here, and I'm really interested to get your opinion. I've been brought into a number of conversations with sales teams and their counterpart pre-sales teams to talk about process. And from my experience, most pre-sales want more process. Most sales teams and sellers want less. They feel like process is limiting. And so there's sort of a little bit of a tug of war. It's interesting. I was having one particular conversation and I was probably listening for about 45 minutes. And at one point, and they were sort of arguing, I'll use that term lightly, about how much process. And at one point I said, folks, here's the thing. I said, without trust, process almost doesn't matter. But what I heard you say is that actually a little bit of process can actually help us build trust. So this is sort of a disruptive truth for me. There's sort of a back and forth here, right? Like process will help us build some trust, and then the more trust we build, maybe we can be a little looser on the process. Do you agree with that? And how do you think trust and process go hand in hand?
Well, the interesting piece, right? When we talk about AEs, I think a lot, and this isn't to disparage our sales brethren at all. But when they talk about process, what's that process generally? It's some sales methodology, right? It's having to put in notes in Manage to Salesforce, which is now connected to Clary. That's the process that they see and are part of and are measured by. But they're more free thinkers, I think. They're a little bit looser and faster in general. Where SEs, again, they're more structured, they're more analytical generally. And I use SEs loosely, right? I mean, I hire SEs, if you will, that are sales engineers 1 minute and systems engineers the next minute, right? That's how I got started, swiveling in that chair to either side of the room.
Yeah.
And so with that, I think by and large, technical minded folks really want something to be able to be guided by, right? So you have to build that trust with your sales peer and collaborate with them. I can't tell you how much I've spoken about collaboration lately, right? I put a post up today talking about empathy. Empathy and collaboration equal culture, I think, in today's companies. And so with that collaboration piece, it's amazing that you could take two sales teams, an SE and an AE, two separate. If one of them has a little bit of trust versus the other one who may be net new or neutral and they don't, the collaboration level can be seen as different things, right? On the team that has neutral to maybe negative kind of rapport, if you will, that collaboration looks like one person doing the other person's job, where in the other one, it's just the other guy backing the other guy up, right? Hey, my AE's hammered right now. I got to take this first sales call. I know the questions to ask. I know how he's going to ask them. So why not go in there and figure out for him if this is a good opportunity for us? And then the AE is going to come back if he trusts him, say, hey, Mike said that A, B, and C didn't happen. So this solution, our solution, probably isn't a primary fit for them. It may be a secondary. Let's revisit that. But again, if you have negative to neutral rapport or collaboration with your rep's going to go, okay, let me talk to him again, right? So now you spent 2 hours for both of you trying to qualify or not, qualify in or qualify out something. So
man, you said so many powerful things there. First of all, I'm not even sure you heard what you said, so I'm going to double click because
okay.
this was a quotable quote. Empathy plus collaboration equals culture. I mean, that's a truth bomb right there. The other thing that came to mind as you were speaking is we need to extend the benefit of the doubt to our sales counterparts, like we would like we would expect people to do to us.
Yeah.
Right. I think so many times we have a tendency to assume the worst, right, instead of just the opposite, right? Like you were saying, like the AE is busy, so sometimes I may need to take a call on his or her behalf, or and then in reverse, if I as the SE take the call and I come back and say, you know what, I'm not sure there's a good opportunity, they need to give me the benefit of the doubt, right? Extend that trust, like, okay, I trust, I trust your instincts. Maybe this isn't a good use of our time, right? Yeah. By the way, we got to give props to some of the comments that are being made here, Mike. This is good stuff. Sean says process is the crossroad where trust meets accountability. Chew on that one for a minute, Mike. What do you think about it? Sean, thank you for that. That's pretty good. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, no truer words have been spoken, right? Certainly, and again, trust and accountability. So, talking, I'm in a position of leadership, but we're all in positions of leadership, right? You don't have to manage people to be a leader or be in leadership. I think that's a big piece, again, of that culture that's really starting to come through. Empathy is a huge piece of that. Collaboration's a huge piece. And so some of the leadership principles even that I follow talk about accountability, right? And so often we hear about holding people accountable or others accountable. You can't do that, right? All you can do is have trust, I think, like Sean is saying, trust that the other person is going to hold themselves accountable for what they're doing and for what their responsibilities are. And like you said, give them the benefit of the doubt that they're doing what they need to do. Does it happen all the time? No, but those things will sort themselves out in the end. It took me 19 and a half years. And again, I've been in here the industry for 20 to figure out it doesn't do you any good to dwell on problems and try to shine the light on, on some of those problems. Do what you can do, take on as much as you can, still having a good work-life balance, but be a good teammate, right? And,
I mean, look, man, and that's just good advice. I mean, you and I are both in our 50s, so I think we can say this with at least a touch of experience. It's just good. It's just good life lesson. Don't dwell on the problems, right? I mean, like we, a saying that I heard probably decades ago. At this point, it's not who's right or wrong; it's what's right or wrong. So let's focus on that. I'm inspired to give Jason Zekowitz a shout out too. Process is the training wheels for trust to go to. That's pretty good. I like that. I like that, Jason. Well said. I like that. I like that notion that process is the training wheels for trust. Mike, I'm going to ask you one final question related to structure. Yeah. And folks, he doesn't see, we again, these are unscripted, unrehearsed, so he doesn't see this coming. So I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. Mike, I just opened up the pre-sales dictionary. It doesn't exist, but we're going to make it up. And I looked up the word structure. What is the definite, as concisely as you can give it to us, what is the definition of structure in the pre-sales dictionary?
That's a good one. I would, if I had to just kind of sum it up, a couple of things, right? I think it's a set of best practices and ideals, right? I don't know if that's exactly right, right? Guidance, right? Guidance might be a better, principles, best practices, and guidance. Because
I love
again,
that.
when we talk about structure, um, it's not the process, right? If you talk about the structure of a house, what's the structure of a house? That's not the blueprint, right? That's not how you build it in hey, the studs in the walls are 16 inches on center. That's not the piece. But the guidance is, hey, I have to have a foundation. In general, it's this deep and it's this wide and those types of things. So it's really best practices and guidance, I think, when we start talking about structure.
I absolutely love that. And again, I mean, the term rules of engagement comes to mind. Jim, I think I'm saying that right. Yeah, Jim Gordon says structure only occurs when working as a team. That is really well said. And by the way, that much more important when working with the team. Let's move on to process, because you said it's not process. And you and I were talking off air, and you said I have to admit I'm not the biggest process guy. You said you're kind of like a bull in a china shop. By the way, I've been accused of that my whole life. My birthday's in April. I'm a Taurus. I'm a bull by nature, right? So, but I've even found myself in different aspects of my career, obviously my life, realizing that there are times when process isn't only valuable, it's critical. So let's talk about some of the process that you've put in place for the team and working with your sales counterparts and working opportunities.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So process for me, especially in this new era over the next, over the last 3 or 4 years, around really being some tailored pre-sales tools, has helped me kind of visualize and do some things, right? I have a bit of ADD, and so I sit down and I could literally bullet point a process out, but you tell me to go put that in a Visio or in a slide deck, and I'm too worried that the line isn't straight or the two boxes I'm putting these things in aren't the exact same size, right? Um,
I mean, look, I mean, guilty as charged on that one. We get so wrapped up with the aesthetics of what we're trying to, like, we lose sight of the actual ideas that we're trying to structure. So,
yeah,
totally with you there.
Yeah, so when I talk about process, right, one of the biggest things that when I started really kind of looking at the pre-sales process, and again, we talked about discovery just a little bit, we won't get into that, but should the SEs be involved? Absolutely, they should. In our industry, there's this, I guess, tribal conflict between proof of value versus proof of concept, right? I've taken on this part of my process and kind of mantra and structure that a POV is all encompassing. And that's a proof of concept and being able to do what we're terming or what we're calling as advanced demos, right? So advanced demos kind of being demos that I use with customers that align to their use cases, traditionally with their technologies, showing them the path on how they could use our solution to get to where they're going in lieu of a POV or a POC, right? So that's kind of that piece. And why do I kind of talk about this from process? If that's the goal, right? Part of the process would have to say, when do I do or when do I engage in that POV? And one of those things is if we're trying to go up to the right, which is, getting those customers, to close faster and more at a higher close rate, those types of things, we have to look at as part of the process, where do we start with the customer or prospect's perspective on us, right? And so part of the process that I really started to articulate, and this probably even goes back to the early 2000s when I first started leading teams, is okay, great. When did we have the biggest number of wins? It's when a customer had neutral or positive view of our solution, and that the fact that that solution can fix their problems or solve their business needs, right? So again, sitting in that room as a young SE, looking at the people talking about business problems and them saying, yeah, I could see it. Going, the technical guy goes, that fit what you're saying? Yeah, it does. So now they have a positive viewpoint, right? So the process says now we can start looking at defining what a POV would look like, right? Can we get Can we get this POV done without having to do a traditional POC? Can we do it by, a number of demos? Can we do this? Can we do that? Now when we're at the POC, part of the process says, how far do I have to take that, right? And there's for as many people that have commented today, there's probably just as many opinions on, the thing about identifying what the use cases are, or the features and functionalities that we're testing, scope creep, and how do we manage that in these POCs and those types of things. So to make a long story longer, right, the process that I first started articulating was the one about how do we get from identifying that a customer has a problem and they believe we can solve it. They don't know how yet, but they believe we can solve it, and getting to the next point where they say, yeah, you're the one, you can solve it, and you've showed us how to solve that problem. Now let's take it to the next step and actually solve it.
Absolutely love that. Again, I'm inclined to double click on a few things you said. First of all, I love this idea of, quote, advanced demos. I'm not sure I've ever heard that term used specifically in that way, but that's a term that I might start to adopt. I think that is a great term because it defines exactly that stage of the process, right? Where it's not a full-on POC necessarily, right? But it's a highly customized demo to their specific situation, maybe with some of their data, right? It's a significant investment of time, I'm sure, on the part of your solution architects or SEs, right? The customer's probably engaged in some level. So love that term. And I love the fact that it all begins with the customer's perspective, right? Like we need clear evidence. And I think this is one of the mistakes, and I'm curious to get your opinion. I think one of the mistakes that too many sales teams make when engaging in POCs or POVs or whatever they call it is it's more them sort of forcing it on the customer than the customer clearly articulating, yes, we have a problem, and yes, we are inclined to believe that you can solve it, but we need to work with you to see if it will actually do and achieve what we're trying to achieve, right? Do you see that from your perspective?
I do. It's interesting, and it's starting to shift a little bit. I've said rapport a couple times now. As you build rapport with customers, and so many people think that, from the sales cycle, if the SE is less present in the beginning, right? It's I don't know. But if we can build rapport, take those opportunities to build rapport with the customer, because again, those are going to give you that positive viewpoint of your solution and yourself, quite frankly. So kind of to your point, when we talk about the perspective of the customer, sometimes we have to give them bad news too, right? Hey, we can absolutely do what you're trying to do, but we don't do it like that. Maybe it's a trap from from another vendor. Maybe it's a competitive, you're the second one in. We don't do it like that, but here's how we would solve that problem and show them the path to getting them again, kind of in the boat, if you will. And seeing themselves, and there's a user that said vision demo versus value demo, right? And I think there's even some nuance in there.
Totally.
But yeah, you have to get the customer to believe that you're the solution for them, right? That's why it's so important to kind of break demos into two pieces. I call them, vision versus value. I call them harbor tour demos versus day in the life of demos, right? You get somebody in a day in the life demo and they go, holy cow, that can fix my problem. When you get them saying that can fix my problem,
I love
they're
that.
all in for you, right?
I love that.
I love that. They're going to go to bat for you all day long.
I call it the warm blanket, like exactly. People are struggling. And by the way, you also mentioned building rapport. We usually need to build some rapport before the prospects and customers we're talking to are comfortable opening up about what the quote real problem is, right? I mean, usually it takes some time to getting to the real problem, but once you do get to the real problem, you can demonstrate to them that we actually have a solution for that. It's like a warm blanket, and they're looking for that, right? I mean, I say this all the time. It's not that people don't want real solutions to real problems. People just don't like being sold to or feel like they're being sold to, right? So we have to build that rapport. Absolutely love that. Incidentally, there's another comment. It just on our side, it just says LinkedIn user, so we don't know who said this, but this is fabulous. Structure is how the organization is built, incentives, things that do not change. Process is flexible. Whoever said that, I'm giving you props for that. That's well said. And I love the idea. In fact, Bill Ballnave and I did a talk maybe 2 months ago with consensus on the 6 different demo types. I think there's a lot to be said, for just realizing and recognizing that there are difficult demo types. Mike, question for you.
Sure.
Are there certain aspects of our role that really can't be put into a process? And if so, what are they, or what are the characteristics of the things that shouldn't be put into the process? And maybe another way to say this is, how do we prevent from trying to over process things? And while I have a heater, guys, this is live. I have a heater running in this office and it's getting way too hot in here. So I'm going to open a door and turn off the heater. All right. So, and this is me in, sort of managing my own process very much in real time. So the question for you, Mike, how can we avoid over processing, quote unquote?
Yeah.
And what are the how would you define, or what are the characteristics of those things that we shouldn't be trying to impose process on?
Yeah, I think once we get out of structure and process, right? Process is just going to define the steps that we should be taking to get to a successful outcome, right? Whether that's a Visio chart that we're following, yes, no, maybe so. Whether it's using a tool to go from one step in the sales cycle to the next. You still have to account for creativity, if you will, right? If you can say that there's any creativity in being a pre-sales professional, then great. But I think it accounts to personality, right? You have to allow the process or the structure, right, even to be a little bit flexible to align with personality. And and using kind of the sales engineer versus systems engineer, those two people are going to have a different perspective on a process than than each other, right? If I'm a sales engineer, I can do demos, I can do POCs, but I'm not going to go in and install and deploy a full stack of Kubernetes and in Docker. But I'm really good at building rapport, relationships, articulating business problems, and aligning those to solutions.
Yeah.
That's different than somebody that is, maybe came from post-sales, came from an engineering background, and aren't great at stepping in during an AE, giving a high level of architecture, say, hey, give me a minute, let me double click on that and tell you how this is helping other customers technically, right? Those are two different things. That the process is the same, but the personality is different, and it has to account for that. So I think that's probably the number one thing that we have to talk about, is personality of that pre-sales professional and how they engage.
Well, I love that, and enough room for us to quote, if I can use my own words, enough room to make it our own, right? Yeah. And I look, for a long time, I've particularly in dealing with the sales pre-sales relationship, the AE-SE relationship, and we've talked about this a little bit, but to me, sort of process sometimes is sort of like, it's there for when we need it. Yeah. Right? Like if we don't have an effective working relationship, if we're not communicating effectively, if we don't have that trust, to a certain degree, processes are put in place to make sure we're at least following the rules. Now, the other thing that comes to mind for me when I think about process is what I would call patterns of behavior, or maybe a better word is patterns of success, or patterns that produce successful outcomes, right? Particularly if we're going to engage with a customer to do a specific POC or POV on a specific sort of platform, or in a specific, if we've learned from previous experience that we need to make sure we do A, B, C, and D, and do it in this order, because it's easy to overlook. And if we do overlook it, it's likely to produce a very, undesirable outcome,
different outcome,
right? That's when we put process in place. So
yeah, so again, going back to the beginning of this conversation, that's what brute force does, right? You bang your head, you run through a wall, you say, "Oh wow!" Instead of running through the wall, I should have took a step to the left and walked through the door.
That's good.
Right. So that's what that process kind of helps. But talking about patterns, right? In a lot of this also starts to get into how do I measure those patterns? What not to be cliche, but what gets measured gets done, right? That's why we use Salesforce to manage every account and every opportunity inside of our profession. Is we measure those things, and as good as that is for understanding what a sales process looks like. I worked with some folks back when I was with the Symantec to put a technical evaluation process together as well, right? What are the 6 steps inside of that technical evaluation that when I double click on that technical proof piece in the sales cycle, that it blossoms out into these different steps. And we're able to take those steps along the way to validate that we're doing the right thing. People hate when I say this next one, but it's the SE's job, right? It's the pre-sales professional's job to qualify a deal out. It's a salesperson's job to qualify a deal in. It's a team's job to figure out which one's in the middle that we're actually going to attack, right? And and by that we have a wider success rate by walking through this technical evaluation. That's a subset of this technical process or this sales process. Yeah. And then the last piece of that is we talk about collaboration. Is that gives us the ability to understand, not demark where an SE would pick up, but to understand, hey, this is my role. I am now the primary here, Mr. AE partner. You're the secondary player here. You're my support person. I'm the person carrying the water. Let me go through this, and then I'll hand that back off. I'll step back to a support role. I'll manage that technical relationship and make sure that we're still in a good position while you take it through the closing stages. And it just becomes this symbiotic relationship. If you do it right, that is just very well oiled versus a bit squeaky sometimes in new relationships or ones that maybe aren't as fine-tuned as they should be.
Really well said. And you talked about metrics and measuring, and I agree. What gets measured usually is what gets done, right? And this is a great segue into automation, because I know in your case you first applied or tried to apply some structure, some rules of engagement, some principles, some guidelines, the guardrails, as we said. You started to define some process, particularly around POVs. But then you also, in your case, you actually implemented a platform to help you manage the team, manage the operation, sort of run pre-sales as a business, as we like to say. And what I hear, we use the term automation, but when you said metrics, what it occurs to me is that tools don't only just help us automate, but they actually help us measure and track, because it gives us that insight that we otherwise wouldn't happen. So let's talk a little bit about that process that you have been through in building out and applying a platform, transitioning to using that platform, et cetera.
Yeah, no, thanks. And again, this platform came from me, and my AEDD working on mapping in an Excel spreadsheet, mapping the sales process and the results and the outcomes and when to move to the next one, to a technical evaluation stages, and saying, hey, when you're here, you're there. And why did we want to do that originally? And the reason I wanted to do that is to, trust but validate, again, cliche nonetheless, that if the sales guy or the sales partner says, hey, this is in procurement, well, we're like, man, we haven't even got through the POC yet. Something's got to give here. 9 times out of 10, right, there's a misalignment. There's sometimes every once in a while that we are in procurement or, something. So how do we make sure we align these, right? So I started doing this, again, as part of a big project when I was leading an enterprise SE team at Symantec, and just kind of continued to refine this. We did it out of Salesforce. But again, it was really hard, right? Salesforce wasn't meant to do this or to be a sub process to an opportunity process, or sales process. So it took a lot of, suspension of disbelief, if you will, right, to get that done.
Mm.
And so I've been following some of these tools, going back probably 4 or 5 years when I was with High Trust before Entrust bought us. We were looking at that. We were looking at Vivint, right? Vivint was the first one on the scene. They were doing it a little techier than you would see in Salesforce. So that wasn't exactly what we were looking for. And when I got here at Appview, we really were looking for something to manage that POC, right? And then what we wound up finding out is we got more into the technical evaluation than just the POC or the POV. And we were able to map that process that I had in a spreadsheet for years and years into this platform, right? You'd mentioned Brian Lewis, right? We went through a pretty exhaustive RFP, and POC process. We chose Home Run for several reasons, but I have to say, every vendor that we worked with was great, right? And everybody is doing things just a little bit different, as a lot of technology companies are. And so in working with Brian and Kevin over at Home Run, we've really taken it to that next step where we understand where all of our deals are in these different technical evaluation cycles. And so from an automation standpoint, I don't know if it certainly doesn't automate the POV or the POC for us, right? But what it does automate is the sharing, the collaboration of the information, the correlation of information that we have, whether it be being able to pull JIRA tickets and assign them and align them to an evaluation, pushing certain data into Salesforce, like customer sentiment, things like where we are, what technical evaluation stage we're in, and we can push that into Salesforce. Oh, and by the way, automation then integrates that into Clary, which we run all of our executive forecasting with, is against Clary. So it's this full circle piece where we're now giving information back to senior leadership in a way that they can run a high level forecast and say, hey, first thing I'm going to look at is I have the sales stage next to the evaluation stage. Are those within one or two? Are we there? And now with some new data, I want to look at the customer sentiment. Are they neutral? Are they positive? Or are they negative? Right? And I'm going to look at the negative top deals that are in alignment and figure out what's wrong with those. And oh, by the way, we can go back into Home Run, take a look and say, in totality, I have this, feature request, or I have this bug, or whatever it is. Yeah, it's assigned to this account, but there's 6 other accounts that are also looking for this. And so the totality of what we're looking for has a value of, $1, $2, $5 million. So it's not just that one account. So that's how we're using, these tools today to automate and help to coalesce that, all of that data across these different platforms.
You mentioned communication and collaboration. Has the implementation of a tool, in essence, a platform for yourself and for your team, and you mentioned the exchange of information with Clary and with Salesforce, and I think you mentioned Jira. Has that actually helped the relationship with sales in some way? And if so, in what way?
Sometimes, right? Sometimes it's a positive, sometimes it's a negative. In that negative is you're shining a light on something that sometimes somebody doesn't want the light shown on, right? Those corners where every once in a while somebody's trying to hide. But by and large, I think it's a positive experience. If for no other reason, you have a single point or a pseudo single point for the technical resource, the pre-sales resource, to get all of this information and to be armed with that, right? Where I think we see our sales peers so often talk about a deal from their interaction and perception, where pre-sales folks generally are more analytical or more yes or no, right? There's less gray there. And so I sit in these executive calls with Home Run pulled up, and when they pull up an account in Clary and somebody starts talking about it, I pull it up in Home Run. I look at all of the JIRA tickets that are against it. I look at all the attributes. I look at the evaluation plan that we've set and said, hey, we're in POV. Here's the success criteria that we've defined in the evaluation. We're 25% through there. and the sales guy goes, yeah, we're just wrapping the POC up tomorrow. There's zero chance, we've been working on this for 15 days, that you're going to wrap this up in the next 24 hours, right?
Yeah.
And then the other piece, the last piece of that, which really started to impact, is being able to also say, we haven't wrapped this POC up yet. So historically, we know that based off of this data, that we don't close POCs in the same quarter we close the deal, right? So now my indication to the process has been, I want POCs to be able to be completed in 45 days. So they either overlap in the back end of a quarter or the front end of a quarter. And on either side, it gives our sales counterpart either the back end of the quarter to close the deal or the front end of the quarter to close the deal. So trying to be a little bit more predictive in that model. And that's the other piece that this lets us kind of work through.
I'm really impressed with this, and Brian called attention to something you shared, and I was inspired to share it too. I mean, the fact that your sales leadership is actually using input from the pre-sales team for their forecasting, I think is just it's amazing. And the fact that you sort of have a checks and balances, you know, if I heard you correctly, you're sitting through a QBR, and maybe the AEs are sort of going through their deals, and you're pulling them up in real time to sort of say, okay, well, let's, you know, it's sort of like some truth serum on the actual state of the opportunity or a deal. So I love that. What are some lessons that you've learned? You've been about a year or so into this road. What are some lessons that you've learned that might be valuable to share with other pre-sales leaders who are thinking about implementing some sort of platform or some sort of automation?
Yeah, I think, you know, take a good look at understanding what the integration points are, right? You know, in the process, right? I can't create a process unless I understand that what the goal is, right? What do I want to get out of it at the end? And I reverse engineer that. And I think that's a big piece here, is what are you trying to get out of, you know, a pre-sales tool like this? Are you trying to get somewhere, you know, one of the criteria for us was a platform that we could put an evaluation together and share that out with our customer, opposed to doing traditional spreadsheets or PDFs where everybody kind of has to check through. Have we gotten there 100%? No, but we were starting to get there. So that was one of the big things for us. And we were able to actually discount one of the platforms we were looking at because they didn't support that. So really understanding where you're going. And I hate to use this word because we all hear it nowadays as pre-sales, future-proof, right? But understand, and this is a big reason we went with Home Run, understand how effective the people you're getting ready to partner with can help you in the future, even if they don't have the functionality you're looking for. How able are they to be flexible in those things that you may be asking for in the future? It's no different than us selling our solutions today, right? Everybody's always asking for the next cloud platform to be integrated, and like nobody knows how to spell that yet, let alone integrate with it, right? So that's the number one thing I think takeaway is really understand what you're trying to get to, and then understand beyond that what that next step might be, and understand how long it may take you to get there. The other thing I'll tell you, as soon as you open up Pandora's box by showing some of this stuff to your executive leadership, be prepared. You know, it's hit me quite a bit, but it's hit Brian, you know, even more so, because in those 2 weeks that we started using this with executive leadership, they got about 500, you know, feature requests saying, hey, I need this, this, and this to do this, you know, this, that, and another. So.
Right. Be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it. Right. I mean, the second you get the executives looking in, that now you've got their attention. Question from someone online: did you use Jira for pre-sales tasking and or sales execution?
Yeah, great question. We're really just using it from an engineering bug tracking, right? Whether it be, you know, documentation, feature requests, bugs. We have a piece that we call our advanced POC team. So if there's something in our platform that we can't do out of the box, but programmatically we can do that, we have a team that helps us develop that. So we're really tracking those types, and then so that's where we are from the use of Jira.
One of the questions that I have, and honestly, I see this a lot. I think a number of the SE leaders that I talk to who are, they've heard about automation and some of these pre-sales platforms, and I think there's a part of them that thinks, well, it might be nice to automate and be able to track some of this, but I think one of the concerns is that their team members, their people are going to view it as just another thing that they need to do to keep track of their time or their activity, and that they're not necessarily going to see it as a value add to them. Did you experience any of that, at least perception early on? Like, were some of your team members a little bit reluctant, and has it proven to actually be beneficial to them in doing their job more than just something to help them, track so you can get your reports?
Yeah, absolutely, right. I mean, I don't care what team you're leading. Some people are going to be adverse to it. Other people are going to say, yeah, I really want to do it. And at the end of the day, it'll shake down somewhere in the middle. And I think it comes, there's a couple things here. You have to use this, right? It can't just be to write reports or to get report data and give them to some people. It has to be that I'm leveraging this data in this information in a way that makes our interactions easier or less needed, right? So if I know I can go to the tool and pull up what feature requests or what trouble tickets that we have, and I understand a bit of the nuance of going into the account and where we are in the evaluation, I can escalate that to senior leadership as needed, right? Or if one of my team members comes to me and goes, hey, I got this piece that just popped up, I'm like, you know what? Jack just put that in as an RFE against this evaluation. Let's go take a look at that. Let's add it to that. And now let's escalate this, because now we have, $1 million opposed to 250K yesterday on this. So you have to show them that there's value in reason to get this data in there, right? So that's to me, that's the biggest one. The other piece, and again, Brian and team have been doing a good job, but some of the other tools are starting to do some of these, is we have to look for additional integrations outside of some of the, hard third-party integrations, for convenience integrations that make it easier for me to put data into this rather than harder, right? Salesforce sucks when I have to go into a field, type in some notes. At best I can forward some emails to an opportunity. But what happens if I go right to my calendar, click on some meetings, and add those activity to demo prep for account X, Y, and Z? Here was a POC, here was an RFI, those types of pieces. As we can get those types of things, I think teams will start to really build and grow, and buy into this effect. But again, the number one thing, you have to show them that they're getting value out of putting this data and this work in, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I hear you saying is that, if you're an SE leader thinking about implementing something like this, I mean, part of the sales job is your team, right? And getting the buy-in from your team. The other thing, and I literally wrote this down. The other thing, when I asked you about the tooling, the first thing you said is you have to think about your process, but then before that, you really have to understand your goal, right? And look, I mean, all of us sell software or have sold software for a living, and most of the people we sell to, we usually tell them, make sure you understand your objective, right? And what is the process that you're going to put in place around. You can't just implement a tool and expect success, right? So we have to eat a little bit of our own dog food here and really follow those same best practices. Mike, I told you this before we did this. I told you the time's going to fly by, and you're not even going to know it hit you. And before you know it, and believe it or not, we've been at this almost 55 minutes. So you have been incredibly gracious with your time, and we are going to land this plane on time. There's one other question that's sort of rattling around in my brain. And I ask this more for the sake of anybody who might still be out there listening to us, or anybody who might be listening to the recording who's not a leader, but as we like to say, an individual contributor. Because a lot of what we've been talking about clearly is more from the perspective of leadership. But if I'm a sales engineer on a team, and I'm going to give you two different scenarios, we're going to take two sides of this equation. We'll start with the first side, which is I'm an SE on a team. I feel like there's not enough process in place, or I feel like there's not enough structure in place, but I'm not sure how to approach my management about this. What advice do you have for that individual?
Well, it's really it's an interesting question, right? Again, being the bull in the china shop that I am, I guarantee I'm a nightmare to manage, especially as an individual contributor, right? Um, so there's a couple things, and I think you have to start having these conversations with your intent, right? What's my intent by having this conversation
Really good.
with my leader, right? Because the difference between saying, hey, I think I want to do this. I'm going to go ahead and do this, right? Or putting out an email asking the team, hey, I need everybody to put in XYZ into the Salesforce field that I just had RevOps create. What's immediately everybody goes, who is this guy, right? Or Grail, why am I doing that, right? Mike or Jim or Chris didn't tell me to do this, so I'm not going to do it. But if somebody came and said, hey, I found by having this information at my fingertips and doing this, I was more likely to get the RF, the feature request, or I cut down on 25 minutes or on a POC. If you say what the intent is of me doing this, especially if I'm trying to bring change or implement change or influence change into the team, that's a lot different, right? You also have to have a leader that's going to trust his team and listen, right? That's probably the other 50%, maybe even 70% of the equation. But I think making your intent understood and why I think this is, I think that's the number one thing.
I absolutely love that. And look, this is one of my favorite things to talk about is this whole notion of other-centered selling versus self-centered selling. And, it's just easy to default to self. I mean, it's just the human nature, right? Yeah. So the more we can think in terms of why is this to the benefit of the company? Why is this to the benefit of the team? Why is this to the benefit of our customers, right? It completely changes the game. Other than, well, I just want this because it's making my life difficult otherwise. Well, now we have an issue.
Absolutely.
There was one question online, Mike, that I'm inspired to share. Again, we just see LinkedIn users, so I don't know who this was, but thank you for the question. Do you make the data available to all SEs so they can analyze themselves? Really interesting question. What do you have to say to that, Mike?
I would say absolutely, right? If you have access to that data, absolutely. There's no reason not to. Quite frankly, again, not to shine the light, the whole light on home run, but that's what we're using today, right? And I know there's some other tools that are doing some analytics very similar, but they've just implemented some stuff for us, especially around some calendaring, around utilization, and those types of things. So will I use that? Yeah, probably. I'll look at that, certainly, right? I might use that as something to inform me if somebody comes and says, hey, I have something and it's not necessarily an account alignment. I need a partner enabled, right? I might go to that and look at it. But I'm probably not going to write the year-end review based off of their utilization on that platform. But certainly they could go in, right? They can go in and look at their peers, see what their peers are doing, how their peers are doing. And as we continue to get more data and a longer sample cycle, we'll start to also see how long did our average POCs taking, right? How long were we in this stage versus that stage? What use cases is, Mike and Jim are killing their number by 50, 60, 80% every year. What types of evaluations are they're doing, right? So we might not analyze that data from a chart, but certainly we can build some graphs and to look at those things so we can say, hey, Chris is killing Mike every time, but you know what? His POVs are only going through the 4 core use cases that we solve better than anybody else. Everything else is an afterthought, right? So certainly I think there's transparency is the name of the game. As much as empathy and collaboration is, a close cousin is transparency.
Man, that is a pretty strong way to finish. Really good. And by the way, as you were talking, Mike, I found myself thinking I'd actually love some insight into where I spend my time. You know what I mean? Like if I don't have any dashboard that says I spend this much time doing LinkedIn Lives and this much time doing workshops and this much time, doing introductory phone calls, et cetera. So, just that insight, I think would be highly valuable for every SE.
I don't know. Don't do it, right? I mean, because then all of a sudden it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. You're like, holy cow, I worked 89 hours this week, and you're like, where did they go, right?
Yeah. That is too true. Mike, we are at the top of the hour, my friend, and I want to be respectful of your time. You've been so gracious. Any words, any words in closing before we put a bow on today's conversation?
Something that's been really hard for me to learn over the years is, as much as we want to define stuff, you have to be flexible as well, right? Again, that one road highway versus 6-lane highway. You have to be flexible, knowing that, hey, I'm going from one road to 6-lane if I'm right. So just be flexible. Be empathetic. Think of things from people's different situations. You never know what's going on, right? And those. I don't care what you're trying to do in life. Those couple things will be incredibly useful to everybody, especially in our day and time right now. Right, everybody needs a hand with everything that's going on. So. Again, just do what you can.
I love that. And that word flexible. I mean, I do believe that's one of the most important words. And you know this. I mean, I run these polls and all these workshops that I do, and one of the things I ask of both AEs and SEs is, what's the one area you'd like to see your sales counterpart improve in? One of the things I most commonly hear from AEs of their SEs
is be flexible.
Be more flexible.
Yeah.
Yep.
The one thing I'll leave on that, right, on the AE side, right, is if everything, if every ask that you have of your SE is, oh, hey, can you help me? And it's special, nothing's special. So that's the other piece. That's the other flip side of flexibility, is they have to be accepting of that flexibility and understand when you've been too flexible, right?
Well, and so I'm really glad you said that, because one of the top 4 things that I get in the reverse.
Yeah.
Be more structured.
Yeah.
Right. So there you go. Mike, it's been a pleasure. You and I have been talking about doing this for a while. I'm glad we finally put it together. Thank you so much for being here. Folks, for those of you who are online, and I don't know if we have anybody left, but thanks so much for being here. Loved all the chatter in the thread there. If you like these, please, give a thumbs up. You can follow #TechSalesAdvice. Of course, go to techsalesadvisors.com to learn more about this organization and what we do. Mike, thank you for being here, sir. I hope you'll come back and visit again. I wish you the best this year to you and your team as you guys continue to build process and structure and automation with a touch of flexibility. So, Mike, hang around just for a minute. Backstage, I'm going to give you your parting guest. To everyone else, thanks for being here. We'll see you next week on Tech Sales Advice.
Thanks, everyone.
Here's all. Bye-bye.